Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Detroit Regional Chamber's Lessons in Leadership. I'm Tammy Carnreich, the Chief Operating Officer for the Chamber, and I'll be moderating today's program. Lessons in Leadership is a virtual series of programs that will offer emerging leaders from business, government, and civic organizations the opportunity to hear from very experienced, great leaders and hear about their leadership journey. I do encourage you to, after today's program, please take a look at our website, detroitchamber.com/lessons in leadership, so you can see our upcoming speakers. This will be an ongoing series. I have to say thank you to Bank of America for their support of Lessons in Leadership. They make these programs happen. And so what I want to do right now is actually introduce Matt Elliott. Matt is the president of the Michigan market for Bank of America, and he has a few comments to make.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We're really glad to have you here. We've been a longtime supporter of the Detroit Chamber, really because it fits in with our mission of improving the financial lives of our clients and our communities. And we know that several of you are probably Bank of America customers, and we appreciate that. But most importantly, what we're here to do is help support the small and medium-sized businesses that make up the fabric of really the economy, not only in Southeast Michigan, but in the nation generally. And so our support usually takes the form of things like supporting the young leaders at Mackinac, or finding other ways to support small and medium-sized businesses. But when we talked to the Chamber about this particular opportunity to sponsor the Lessons in Leadership series, it really struck a chord with us, because if nothing else, the last year has taught us that leadership matters, and that it was really important to have a diverse set of voices around leadership to have a fulsome discussion. So we're grateful to have General Coffman today talk about his experience, which we think is going to be fascinating. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and for the sponsor, for the Chamber to give us the chance to sponsor it. So Tammy, I'll turn it back to you, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you very much, Matt. So for those of you joining us today, just to let you know, I will be introducing our speaker momentarily, who will be talking with you for about 15 minutes to share his thoughts on leadership and about his leadership journey. And then we'll go into Q&A. I will remind you there is a chat box that is on as an option on here. And if you'd like to enter questions for General Coffman, I'll make sure to try and enter them into all of our Q&A time. But without any further delay, I want to introduce today's speaker. I have the privilege of speaking with Major General Ross Coffman. He's the Director of Next Generation Combat Vehicles Cross-Functional Team for the Detroit Arsenal, and of course, representing the U.S. Army. General Coffman is uniquely positioned to discuss leadership and the attributes that make an effective leader. I have had the opportunity to work with him several times, and I have always been very inspired by his leadership in the way he discusses leadership. During his decades of military service, he has led tens of thousands of men and women in uniform. And in his current role, he's helping to drive innovation for the battlefield and ground combat vehicles to ensure that the U.S. Army is the best equipped and prepared for fighting in the world. Prior to his role here, he served as the Deputy Commanding General for Maneuver in the 1st Infantry Division in Eastern Europe. And he is someone who is an innovator for our U.S. Army with these new, unique, next generation combat vehicles. So he has a really exciting job right now. So General Coffman, thank you very much for speaking with us today, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. I'm very, very happy to be here. And Matt, thanks for all your kind words and for sponsoring this. I am actually sitting outside Carnegie Mellon on working on some artificial intelligence and robotic future developments here. So I'm not in the desert, but they've put me in this remote site. And behind me, you would have seen a less than appetizing broom closet and refrigerator. So I got the desert up there from Yuma, where we do a lot of experiments. And today, I could not be more excited to be talking about leadership and really what that means to your Army, and some things that I've pulled out that have helped me create leaders and develop leaders throughout my 31 years of service. You know, in the Army, we like to think that we have leaders and future leaders. so that everyone will be developed at some point to lead others, whether that's in battle or in day-to-day operations here in the States. And the Army defines leadership as providing purpose, direction, and motivation. And if you pull back the page a little bit, you'll see that the Army has grounded its leader development programs in the situational leadership theory. And that situational leadership theory really speaks to the change required by each individual leader based on the surroundings of the situation, but also on the motivation of each individual person. And a leader must get to know those people that work for her or him and determine what motivates them, and then use those characteristics to help develop the team as well as the individual person. And then finally, with situational leadership, what you find is it's a zero-sum game between task and relationship. And why that appeals so well in the Army, and I think anywhere, is that you can either task an individual or continue to develop a relationship and support them. So in any Army movie you've seen dealing with basic training, those soldiers are getting a ton of tasks and very little relationship, right? It is all task. It's all in bringing them up to our standard. And then on the opposite side of that, you look at a Delta Force team or a Special Forces team or senior leaders such as myself. We're professional. We know what to do. We understand the task that is required of us. And so there's very little task because we motivate ourselves to accomplish the mission for the betterment of the team. But there's a lot of relationship, and that my leaders determine what I need to be successful, and then provide that. And in kind to my senior leaders, I do the same. So that kind of frames what the Army has done with leader development. And obviously we could talk for hours on how that manifests itself day to day, whether at the lowest levels or highest levels in the Army. But what I'd really like to highlight is something that over my 31 years in the Army, that I think there are two components that will help you as you develop leaders and future leaders in your organizations. And that it doesn't matter whether you're a small, medium, or a large company. We all deal with people, and those people are the lifeblood of our success. And so those two things that I want to talk about today are the silver bullet of leadership and something I call the critical path of leadership. And the manifestation of this in your organization, I believe, will help you. And so whenever you read a leadership book, or at least whenever I read a leadership book, I come away kind of going, yeah, okay, no kidding. Okay, buy low, sell high. Location, location, location. We just accept these as facts. And so often when you're reading a leadership book, you're like, yeah, okay, I get it. Treat your people well. No kidding. But it's the application of that on a daily basis and evaluating yourself. So let's talk about the critical path of leadership. And for those liberal arts students like myself, really the critical path is laid out in a PERT diagram. Really, it's from A to B to C to D. That is, it must be done in that order. You can't frame a house before you pour the foundation, for example. And so I believe that the critical path of leadership has 5 components. The first is standards. Second is trust, candor, purpose, and communication. Let's unpack that a little bit. So standards. So any new employee, and for those of you that have onboarded anyone in the last year, bringing someone into your culture, bringing someone into your organization remotely, and having them understand the standards is very challenging. Okay, it's not going to change in the future. But why do we do that? Why is that the first step? Well, number one, because they need to understand the left and right limits. They need to understand who they need to go to process either pay or get approval for a project or a sales proposal. What are our standards in our organization so they know what to follow? And then as leaders, they need to understand the standards so they can enforce them. and they are firmly grounded on the standards that you have set. And they can rely back on those to determine whether or not their subordinates are doing the right thing or not, because they all have a common standard. And as long as you start with that, then the rest, I think, becomes achievable. If you don't have a common standard and everyone's kind of rolling their own, well, then it begins to erode the next component, which I think is trust. So the first step is standard, and the second step is trust. What I find interesting about trust is not a learned emotion. It's not a learned feeling. Mistrust is. When you're born, you have complete trust. And then over time, and for each of your employees, it's different. Over time, that trust erodes in certain areas. And when that employee is hired by you, they're bringing all of that baggage, whether from their last employee, whether relationships in their previous lives, etc. They're bringing that to your organization. So how do you establish trust 360 degrees? I get a little frustrated with the leaders that say, my employees must earn my trust. If they have to earn your trust, then I would say get rid of them, right? My position is your employees should have your trust. You should give it to them freely. And if they break trust, well, then you have a situation to deal with. But it should be flipped on its head. You should have to earn their trust daily. That you are committed to your personnel. You're committed to the organization. You are so focused on maintaining that trust from you to your subordinates that becomes a significant part of your time, because your employees deserve that. And one thing that I think junior leaders don't understand is they're going to break trust. They're going to continuously break trust with their team. Not on purpose, not nefarious, but what happens is they make statements like, okay, hey, listen, you've been doing a great job, and you may have done this. We've done a great job. We hit all our quarterly numbers. Next Friday, I want everyone to take the day off. And then on the Wednesday before that Friday, we find out that the shipment has been moved left and it's coming in on Friday, and people are going to have to come to work. You just broke trust, and we got to own it. And that's why I say every day we have to work to maintain and earn the trust, because everyone understands that things happen. Everyone understands that things go wrong, but it's the true leader that looks the employee in the eye and says, look, I broke trust with you. I'm going to make it up to you, and this is how. But if you have standards and trust, I think you can go, there's nowhere that you won't accomplish what your goal is. And then what I find when I talk to young companies, the horizontal trust, everyone kind of focuses on that. But what I'd ask you to do is think about within your organizations, what are you doing to establish lateral trust, peer-to-peer, sales to logistics? Like, how is that? How does the sales force know that that's going to ship on time? And what happens when that trust is broken? So how are you establishing lateral trust, peer-to-peer? And if you don't have a plan, then I suggest that you spend some time thinking about the best ways to do that. And if you're still lost, then reach out. I'll be happy to help. The next one is candor. So you have standards and trust, and now candor. Candor is very, very difficult to learn. And I've dealt with young leaders for 31 years. The ability for a young leader to look another person in the eye and say, you're not doing your job without emotion is very, very hard. And you have to train them to do that. You need to put them into situations where they can work with you to be able to deliver the candid conversation. And not everyone is good at that, and they need to work on it. But without candor, and that's candor up and candor down, then we need to, you're going to be missing something in your organization, and that's going to erode trust. And next is purpose. So everyone wants to know where we're going. What's the goal line? What are we trying to achieve? And it's not solely the bottom line, right? There may be a higher purpose for the action, but that if we haven't spent enough time as an organization determining what the purpose of every individual, every team, and the company writ large, I think you're missing an opportunity. And a lot of people do that up front, and then 5 years later, they determine that purpose, that vision statement from top to bottom is lacking, and they don't go back and relook at it. So I'd ask for you to go, take a look at your purpose and how it's communicated. And then last, communication. With any relationship, communication is always the hardest thing. And to assume that your leaders are good communicators is a really bad assumption. And you need only ask their subordinates a few questions to determine whether or not they're communicating correctly or incorrectly, whether or not it's sufficient. And the sufficient communication is always over communication in my experience. For instance, if you're the leader of a medium-sized company that you've grown, well, it used to be very easy to get the word out. Everyone's around the coffee table. Hey, everybody listen up. Now you've grown to a number of employees and you don't know if they're reading what you want them to read or not. You don't know if they understand the changes that you're making or not. What is your feedback mechanism for that? And I think that if you can communicate well, establish purpose, have leaders that are candid, and trust 360 on established standards, that you're going to absolutely have an exceptional climate and organization. And then the last thing I'll say on this critical path is, if you are having problems in your organization somewhere, right? Nothing is perfect. I would say that one of those, whatever problem you're having in your organization today can go to one of those 5 points. And it's important to identify which bucket it's in. Is it a standards problem? Is it a communications problem? Because if it's a communication problem, you're trying to solve it with trust or candor or purpose, you're going to miss the mark and you're only going to make it worse. You got to bend it correctly and then go after that in a specific manner that fits with your culture and your organization that you've grown. All right, last, I've got about 1 minute and 15 seconds to talk about the silver bullet of leadership. It's very, very simple. Care. You want everyone in your organization to care more about the success of the organization than themselves, more about their subordinates than themselves. And so how are you inculcating that into your hiring process? How do you know that the people in your organization actually care about the success of the team above the success of themselves? And I know this is really hard, but it starts with you and your verbalization of what you find important. And as long as you care about your people and they know it, they will do anything in the world for you. If you ever listen to Dan Pink's TED Talk on motivation, he talks about the carrot and the stick being obsolete. I don't know that it's obsolete. I think that the reward and punishment of good and bad behavior is absolutely useful in certain situations, but I would say very rarely. And with that, I'll be happy to entertain any of your questions.
Thank you very much, General Coffman. And I want to just come off of your discussion of critical path of leadership. We have, obviously, in our town hall today, both large and small businesses. So when you talk about critical path to leadership, would this differ between a startup versus an existing company?
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, so you're a startup and you've got about, you're on employee 10 and everyone is buying into the culture. Everyone is nose to the grindstone. Everyone's crushing themselves because they believe and they all communicate and see how hard one another are working. And then you go to about 11 and you start hiring new people. Well, the culture is like, how are you maintaining that culture? And it really gets to the critical path of leadership. If you're a startup, you need to spend some time on your standards up front, because once you hit 21 employees, you're almost losing control of that. And you will have a culture, it just won't be the culture that you chose. And then when you get to 50 in 2 different locations, it becomes even harder. And so that's on the startup side. On an established business, a large or medium established business, the hardest thing is changing your standards, changing the way you've done things, because these become, I'm in the Army, right? One of the largest bureaucracies in the world, if not the largest. And the momentum and personal energy it takes to change culture at every echelon, it's absolute. I mean, it's draining. And then when you're still trying to get, if you're on the private side, trying to get new business, continue to grow, hire new employees. I mean, so you're in competition. But I would just say, if you're an established company and you're having problems in one of these areas, you probably need to look and deep dive what the standards are, and then go from there, because you're in for a long haul to change that culture in an established organization.
Thank you. A big part of the job for you being an Army leader is to constantly work to train the next generation of leaders. And you've talked about the next generation of leaders. In your organization, do you set aside specific time or create specific steps to provide formal training? Or is this leadership training something that happens more organically?
Yes. So an old adage in the Army is 2 levels down. So if I'm if I'm the leader of a civilian organization or leader of a military organization, what are 2 levels down? That's your responsibility. And you have personal responsibility for not just your direct reports, but their direct reports. And you must set time aside to teach, coach, and mentor them to become what you want them to be. The biggest mistake I've made every step of my career, and I keep falling into it, is I assume knowledge, and I assume that my subordinates are going to lead their organizations the exact way I did. And I fall into this trap every time. And I'm very trusting, but I have to constantly remind myself, they are not me. They don't have the same experiences. So I must spend time with them to ensure that what they hold as important is what I hold as important. Because if not, you're allowing their last boss to determine how they prioritize what's important, and not you.
So you lead a team of both soldiers and civilians. Having a team that works in different statuses, such as that, how does that impact your approach to leadership? And then follow up to that, do you interact with the 2 groups differently?
I think there's a common respect that has to be established, and that common respect comes out of your candor. I try not to treat anyone differently. However, we all have unconscious biases, right? So like if I see someone in a suit, we have like experiences, and oftentimes you can be drawn towards someone who has like experiences. And I'm saying this is leaders writ large. So if you're into NASCAR, or you're into golf, you're into whatever it is, and there's one of your subordinates is into the same things, you're naturally drawn to that because it's a comfortable conversation. What I tell leaders is find those people that you have nothing in common and make an extra effort to go deal with them. Because I've never had so many Department of the Army civilians working for me directly, and their experience is very different. However, their experience makes us so rich, and I mean, it just deepens the colors of what we can accomplish because they come from different backgrounds. They're not the same. They have no idea what hua means, but they want a lot of it. But it is absolutely amazing when you can blend people of different experiences. And, I think, the country writ large is understanding this more and more each day, that diversity of experience and diversity of in any way makes us richer. And so, yeah, I think, we got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. So you should tee that up with their different groups.
And I will say, as I am obviously a civilian, working to support the U.S. Army, I have absolutely seen you firsthand treat civilians the same as you do everyone else. Very respectful and very supportive. So I thank you for that. At this point, I'd like to take a question from the audience. And so Timothy Allen Davis, thank you for this question. Timothy says, you touched on this, but can you talk more about mistakes and how they can be traced to one of the 5 points? I assume it could be traced to more than one. In my organization, we talk about learning from mistakes. I realize mistakes can be more serious in your organization, but how do you operationalize leading your team to learn from mistakes?
So the after action review, an Army product. And one of the reasons that we are the best Army in the world is because when something goes wrong, everyone gets in the room and we are critical not only of ourselves, but we can be critical of our leaders. And why did this happen? And so I always say in the Army, and I hope this is true in every business in Detroit, is like, nobody cares what happens. They just want to know what you're doing about it. Because bad things do happen. And as long as it's not nefarious, right? As long as it's not purposeful, then okay, we have to move forward because you can't change it. It is just where it is. If it's someone that's doing something nefarious, then get rid of them. And you have that luxury. Sometimes we do not. But if the first thing that I always ask myself when someone really screws something up, and I would encourage the rest of you to do the same, is, what did I say? What was my guidance? Because these women and men are just crushing themselves to be successful for the United States Army. And oftentimes I find out I was wrong. I gave the wrong guidance and they did exactly what I told them. But when I was a young leader, I would always make the assumption that, oh, it was their fault. And now that I'm an old guy, I'm like, well, more often than not, I wasn't clear. And so I think we have to look at our companies, large, small, startups, it doesn't matter, the United States Army, it's all a lesson in leadership. And the key is when someone makes a mistake, and you know they will, you got to maintain trust. And that candor of going up and saying, hey, you knew the standard, you didn't follow it, that's unacceptable, you can't do that again. And let's move on. And the last thing I'll say on mistakes, because it is important, I say this all the time to my employees. When this conversation is over, it's over for me. I'm going to walk away and I'm not going to think about it again. You can dwell on it as long as you want. But for me, I just needed to correct the action and we're going to move forward because life's too short to dwell. And I think that young leaders screw that up routinely. It's just like, someone constantly bringing up the same thing. It just frustrates the hell out of you. Look, okay, you said I screwed up. I agreed. Boom, it's over.
So you've talked about young leaders, senior leaders, what you've learned. So what is your leadership style and how has it evolved over your career?
I think the biggest evolution has been my maturation of feelings of trust. The Army has a unique system, and the United States Army is the best Army in the world for many reasons, but one is because of our non-commissioned officer corps. So these are young women and men that came in right out of high school, usually some right out of college, and they enlist. They hold their hand up and they say, I want to be a private in the Army. And then in about 3 to 4 years, they become a sergeant. And then on and on. And then, everyone's heard of a sergeant major who, they walk on 6 6-inch pocket of air. They levitated around the earth. Sergeant majors are the king of all-day survey. But one of the things that we do is when you're a brand new second lieutenant coming out of college, you go to a platoon and you have a non-commissioned officer that's been in the Army about 14 years. He's training you or she's training you to do your job. You make more money than them. They technically work for you, but there's a humility driven in to our officer corps from the onset that non-commissioned officer knows more than you do, and you better shut up and listen. And so that's how it starts. But for me, you start getting throughout your career, and for all of us, we've been let down by people, right? And so oftentimes the human reaction when you get let down is, okay, I'm going to pull that authority up to my level. So we're really good at removing authority. We're really bad at reissuing authority. So first I've learned about trust, and next I've learned about, okay, correct the action and reissue authority and continue to allow them to do their job. But when I was young, I had a hard time with candor. When I was young, I had a hard time with trust. I wasn't a very good communicator. These are all things along this critical path. I think perfection is unattainable. I think if you can get to about 80% in these 5 areas, then you're doing better than most people in the world. But it's a constant journey and a constant development of yourself and others.
Thank you. So let me go back to the chat box. Kevin Johnson, thank you for submitting your question. General Coffman, would you approach things any differently when you are working with external partner organizations?
No, I don't know if I'm an exception or not, but I'm very candid. I speak my mind all the time. I often say that my memory is not good enough to lie, and I'm not smart enough to be coy. So let's all just be honest. And when I'm dealing with any organization, I absolutely follow that, because I trust you until you give me reason not to trust you. And I figure if we're having a conversation, then you want to in some way help a soldier, or you want to help us get better. And if you want to help a soldier, then you're a friend of mine. So I don't treat anybody any different. Now, once someone breaks trust with me, I treat them very differently. Particularly if they don't own it. If someone breaks trust and doesn't own it and just come up and say, hey, listen, I made a mistake and it won't happen again, it's over for me at that point. Okay, you're back on the trust team. But if someone doesn't own it, or they do something to purposely hurt a soldier or purposely try to disadvantage the United States Army, we can't be friends.
It's very, very hard to rebuild trust in any situation or any relationship, that's for sure. You've learned leadership skills in the academic classrooms, workshops, your experience within the Army, and maybe a few other sources that I am missing. But from which of these sources do you believe you learned the most?
Observation. So I started when I was a young officer, a book, and it's not a book, a novel or anything like that would ever be shown to anyone else, but it was, what did I see other people do really, really well that I wanted to emulate? And what did I see people do that I would never emulate and I think was just the absolute wrong thing? And it's an old adage that, you learn as much from someone that does something poorly in leadership than you do. So everyone knows that. But taking the time to write it down and then reviewing it. So when I go back and I read what I wrote as a lieutenant, some of it I'm like, wow, that is dynamite. But that's maybe like 1 in 20. The rest of it is, God, I was very naive. But it helps because when you're communicating to a young leader, you need to understand that that's their perspective. And that now I can speak to those, the naive comments that I had. I can address that to them when I communicate. So it's very, very helpful. But I think we observe leaders from the youngest age, right? Probably starting with our parents and how they treated each other and other people, and and it goes on till today. I mean, I'm learning something every day, watching how people handle, and I think I admire leaders that have qualities that I don't, and I try to emulate those. Really good listeners. That just fascinate me. The people that can just, they are switched on. We all know this. These people that are looking you in the eye and they're listening to every word that you say, and they're hanging on, and then they think, and then they speak. I've been working on that skill set for 10 years. I'm quick to answer, and I have to really, really hold myself back, think, process, and then go. I don't do it out of, ill will. It's who I am. So I think we develop every day, and we learn every day.
So as a follow-up to what you just mentioned, who's the leader that inspires you the most?
Well, I think my father obviously had the biggest impact in my life. This was a man who went to Korea as a private, came back as a first sergeant, put himself through college, and then attained the rank of colonel. Had just a great career. But he was a standards-based man, and he understood the standard, enforced the standard, was very candid, hard man, wonderful. And then he turned into a grandpa, and then it was like, where have you been? You're serving up root beer floats every day. So, but watching that, his standards based, and then my mom, who loves people. And really, when you talk about the silver bullet of leadership and just caring, that's where I learned how to care for people. So it's the duality of those two coming together that has really framed my leadership style the most.
And thus, you mentioned earlier, learning from parents. So that does all come together. As I was researching you, you certainly have quite an educational background, bachelor's degree from Center College, earned an MBA from Embry-Riddle University, and graduate fellowship from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. How did education play a role in shaping you as a leader, or has it been more through organic experience?
No, well, so you can see both at Harvard and at Center, a very liberal arts focus. And I think that the liberal arts background allows you to weave in leadership styles based on things that are not, it's not STEM, right? I mean, that's not my forte. I'm not, a ones and a zero kind of person. I mean, I do have an MBA, and I understand the finance side, but I really fall back on when it comes to leadership, into, Plato and, just everything from the ancient philosophers to, how our government works, and how you can leverage different things in leadership to get what you want based on checks and balances. I mean, it's just, I've always found my time in academia as rewarding, mainly because of the ability to learn and reflect. I think we always learn, but whenever I'm going to school, I have reflection time, and I can apply that and think about how to use those lessons in day-to-day leadership. So those pauses in my career have really allowed me to hone the leadership skills that I have. I mean, and again, not perfect. I need to get better every day, but I sure do enjoy people, and I sure do enjoy watching them grow. So that's kind of how academia has played into my life.
So one thing I know about you, or I've learned about you, are a very innovative thinker. Obviously, you're in the position you're in because the U.S. Army needs innovation going forward, and you are, turning around innovation at every level with with your work with the next generation tanks and vehicles. Can you talk about innovation and how do we somehow expand our own personal thinking and performance day to day to be more innovative, to keep innovation at the front of what we do?
Yeah, what I would say, Tammy, is, so my whole role, as you said in my bio, I mean, I've never been really outside of a combat division. I mean, I'm a combat soldier. I'm not here to be an engineer. I'm here to say, look, I'm a warfighter. This is how I want to change warfighting. And what I think is unique about my time in Detroit is I can lay out a different way to fight on the battlefield. I can communicate that. And the engineers and the artificial intelligence experts and the robotics experts that I work with on a daily basis can take my words and then say, okay, this is what's technically possible today. And this is what we think is technically possible tomorrow. Let's invest money in both. And so we cast a wide net based on a common understanding. Again, purpose, communicating purpose to a large body. One example, we had about 127 scientists and engineers and soldiers in a conference room in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And I said, hey, listen, in the future, I want sites armed with algorithms to be able to identify and geolocate enemy vehicles, then promulgate that across all of the friendly forces, while a brain in the background that knows where all the friendlies are can identify the best shooter to eradicate the target. And I want to start with 2 enemy, 2 sensors, and 2 shooters, and do it in 2 minutes. That was the problem statement. 10 months later, not only did we do it, but we did it in 20 seconds. I don't know how to code. I honestly don't really understand how computer vision works, or LiDARs for that matter. I mean, I'm conversant, but if you want to get technical, I don't need to. I just need to provide the vision and let people trust people to do what they are good at.
Okay, yeah, it gets back to trust again. So I feel like I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but we're running out of time. We're getting close to the closing. Let me give you the opportunity for any final remarks of anything that perhaps I didn't ask that you would like to share.
I would just say that for all the leaders out there, the people that work for you are absolutely hungry and thirsty for your attention. And you'll know when it's too much, because they're kind of looking at their shoes and watch and wondering for you to leave, because they're scared they're going to say something and get in trouble. But how are you as a leader personally involved with subordinates 2 levels down, and if you're the CEO, with everyone? How are you measuring yourself? And so look, we all get really busy, and you show up and it's Monday morning, you're like, okay, today I'm going to accomplish A, B, and C. And at the end of the day, you're like, crap, I didn't get to A. And so I would ask that on your way home from work every day, and that may be in this environment, on your way from the over the garage to the fridge to get a beer, right? I mean, I don't know, but ask yourself this question: did I happen to work today, or did work happen to me? Did I accomplish what I wanted to accomplish? Did I influence my organization? Did I move the ball further? Or was I consumed by the crisis of the day, and it went all out the window and I didn't get it? And the goal you should shoot for is 80-20. If 80% of the time you can happen to your job, you can happen to your company, you can happen to your employees, and 20% is a wash, you're doing really, really good. So that's a way to measure yourself. And it's just all internal reflection. And if you, anyone that is interested in anything I said or has other questions can always hit me up either through the chamber, or you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or anything other than Snapchat.
Well, General Coffman, thank you so much for sharing your story today and your perspectives on leadership. But I also very much appreciate the way you could explain that military and business are not different when it comes to leadership styles. That it's very much in alignment. And I thank you for the very specific examples that you shared there, and for encouraging us as we go forward as leaders. Thank you to Bank of America again, Matt Elliott, to you and your team for helping to sponsor these series. And for all of you who joined us today, in a couple of weeks, we will have another Lessons on Leadership. It'll be on May the 13th at 11 a.m. And I'll be speaking with Najah Bazzi, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Zaman International. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I thank you for joining us. General Coffman, best wishes to you as you go forward with your leadership journey.